Welcome to Between the Lines. I'm Traci Hunter Abramson, and I'm here with Esther Hatch, Sarah and Eden, and Sean and Bessie. And we are going to discuss something a little maybe more exciting, less exciting, I'm not sure, than a recent podcast episode we've done on kissing scenes. This time we're going to be talking about action scenes. So first thing I want to ask about is, where do you actually find action scenes? Are they really only in suspense and thriller novels, or do you find them other places?
I hope you find them other places, because they're in almost all of my historical novels.
And I think, too, it kind of depends on how you define it. When you say action scene, you mean like, a shootout or a martial arts action scene, then maybe they're not in all genres. But I don't think action has to just be that. It's the physical movement and tension between characters. And so, no, I think they're found in a lot of places. They just maybe look different from genre to genre.
Yeah, sadly, that was one thing I learned as I was writing, is that they are pretty much in every book. And you have to figure out how to write them. They are just a little bit different than what I normally write, which is, I guess, a lot of internal thought, and I don't know.
And kissing scenes.
Yeah, and kissing scenes. So they're kind of like that.
Yeah, and I mean, it is a different kind of scene, and can be challenging. But now that we've established that action scenes are not, that they can pop up in any genre, tell me, why do you think it's so important to make sure you get those right, those specific scenes? Yeah. What is so critical to them?
Well, I think so often these scenes, if done well, are just really what gets the reader's blood pumping. They're invested. At least they should be, if you do it right. A well-done action scene can really up the stakes of a novel, which is always something as authors we're trying to do, is just making sure the stakes are high, that that something is going on that makes the reader nervous. And I feel like an action scene is a great way to do that.
Yeah, I agree. And there's just so much that is going on in an action scene. If it is the kind of action scene that is a physical fight, no matter what the weapon, it has to be realistic. And that makes it very difficult to write, because, you're in your mind's eye trying to figure out how somebody falls and how someone kicks and how, all of these different logistics. I feel like the tension in those action scenes is critical, because it has to move the story forward. You can't just reach the action scene and stop. It has to move it in the right direction. And for me, one of the most important things is, by the time you get to that action scene, your readers really need to be so invested in your good guys or your heroes and heroines that they really care who wins. They really care how those characters come through that action scene.
Okay, and you say when you get to the action scene, and here I'm going, what? That's not the first page. So clearly,
well,
different genres.
You're magical, because you have people invested in your characters on page one. Most of us have to work up to that.
But truly, I think that is one of the hardest things in writing an action scene. If you do it really early, like for the thriller type genre, is honestly, don't the three of you probably actually go into like what color eyes your characters have, and maybe what they're wearing and things like that. And I'm sorry, if somebody's shooting, they don't care what color the eyes are. So it's something I have to balance in a scene. But I think also Sean touched on it, is the plausibility. If it doesn't seem realistic, I think we kind of lose our credibility as an author a little bit. And so we have to be super careful on that.
Yeah. Right. And as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, these are the exact same both challenges and reasons they're important when we're talking about kissing scenes, guys. I mean, kissing is just another kind of action, you know what I mean? But it's the same idea. Like, you need your readers invested. You need the pacing. The tension needs to be there. There's a build up to it. It's important that you get the details right, but you get the right details so that it doesn't slow down your pacing.
You're
But so that it
absolutely
also
right,
reveals
Sarah.
character.
That's why we hate
Yeah.
both of them.
I'm realizing there's a correlation.
And the plausibility, like, can you really tip your head that way and do this with your head? No, just kidding.
See, exactly. It's the same
Exactly the
thing.
Oh my gosh, it's true. I do hate both. I'm sorry. I think they're both just so challenging.
Yes.
But okay, so what do you find, speaking of challenging, what do you find to be the most challenging part of writing an action scene?
Same answer as kissing scenes. The part where I have to write it is the most challenging part of writing it. It just is.
Okay, seriously, I was going to say that. Like, I'm never quite sure which is worse. Writing an action scene or kissing scene, it's usually a toss-up, but whichever one I'm about to write is at that moment the worst thing ever.
Right.
It's true. So for me, if I'm writing an action scene that involves weapons, or even come to that, like martial arts or anything like that, for me, one of the biggest challenges is lack of experience because I don't have a black belt in anything. And I grew up in a country where owning a gun is almost unheard of. In fact, when I left Wales to attend BYU in Provo, I can still remember the first time I saw a gun. It was in the back of a police car up on the brackets. And I just had to stand and stare at it because it was the first time I had seen a real gun in real life. And to this day, I have not ever held a real gun. And so writing fighting scenes that involve guns, whether it's like a pistol in the Georgian era or, I don't even know what they're called, some kind of fancy one in the books I write with Traci, she has to put the brand in because I don't know what they are.
HK something.
That's what's hard because it takes me way out of my areas of expertise.
I think for me, it is, the struggle is just to get it right? Like so often I write a scene and it's hard to get further from he shot the gun, he opened the door, he shut the door, like these silly things that like it happens too fast. And so getting the pacing right on an action scene, I think is so important. And I usually just have to go back and like maybe let it sit for a minute, go back and read it and be like, oh, I thought I wrote a really well-paced scene, but as I read it, this is a trick, guys. Writing takes longer than reading. So like sometimes I feel like, no, I wrote on this scene for a long time. It's well detailed. It's the right pacing. And then you read it and you're like, well, that was over quick. So I think rereading is like a huge thing for me to reread it and look and see like, did I get the pacing right? Does that make sense the way I worded it? And you almost have to take a little break before you do it. So you've got your writing brain off and your reading brain on. That's what I have to do. That's complicated, but
I have to tell you, wow, that was over quick is also the feedback I get on my kissing scenes. I'm finding a lot of parallels.
We thought you might, when we talked about doing this episode, we had that conversation that action scenes and kissing scenes, there are some correlations on that.
By the time we're done, nobody is going to even understand how we finish a book, ladies.
Or why we write, because we apparently hate it all.
I know.
Only just certain scenes. Everything else could be good. Okay, yes, I don't like research either. Clearly I have a problem, you guys. But okay, so have you guys found any other tips? Because Esther gave us one that was a great one on making these scenes realistic, or how to make sure we keep the reader engaged. What do you guys think?
I would agree with Esther. I really think it's about getting the pacing right. And not just in the action scene, but the build up to the action scene and then the postlude to the action scene. It's just the pacing is so important because it adds the level of tension to your story. It has to come up, peak, and then slowly come back down again. And there are tricks to do that with the way you write and the kinds of words that you use. But it really is kind of a whole. It's not just that one little scene. It's the way it fits into everything else.
Right. One thing I've found that I have to pay a lot of attention to is the details that I include, but also which details get left out. The more details you include, the slower your pace is going to go. But if you don't include enough, then it's too hard for readers to understand or picture what's happening in a scene. So that's something I have to pay attention to. My first draft of an action scene very much fits what Esther described, where you're like, I worked on that for 5 days. How is it only 2 lines long? You know, so I have to go back and add in the details. But figuring out which details will help a character or a reader engage, but also which details the point of view character themselves would notice, because then your scene is an action scene, but it also develops character. And when you can accomplish 2 things in one scene, it's going to be more powerful.
Well, I think another trick that I use, I call it white space, but when you look at an action scene, a lot of times you'll see that there's more white space on the page, like you'll have shorter paragraphs, shorter sentences. And a lot of it is because we're trying as authors to give the reader the opportunity to, as they're trying to read fast, we're trying to make it easy on them. But the other thing that I find, I find it difficult to write, but it's always, again, it's Esther's tip of reading through it. A lot of times in action scenes, we have multiple things happening at the exact same time. And so trying to make that come through, sometimes you are going to have a lot of that, again, white space or, you know, short paragraphs and everything, to make it a little easier, to try to keep it, very clear on going through that. Because like I said, when I'm reading action scenes, most of the mistakes in my books will be in an action scene because I read them fast, the editor reads them fast, the copy editors read them fast, and so do the proofreaders. Like, we're all doing the same thing. So it's like, okay, if you find a mistake there, we all just missed it.
Because their heart is pounding and they're invested in the story.
If it's working right.
Yeah. So
is that the sign of a good action scene? Lots of typos?
Yes.
It could be. Or really
I never knew.
New ones in.
I actually remember my aha moment the first time I wrote a book with Traci, and I saw those short sentences and I thought, this is how she's doing it. Because, as a descriptive writer, you can have a sentence that's 3 lines long. Right. And if Traci's are 3 words long, it's a long sentence.
Yeah,
it's true.
Okay. So I'm going to tell you my number 1 trick with action scenes. And I can't remember. I know this came from a critique partner or a beta reader or someone. But, and this is so simple. This tells you how bad I was at them at first. But the trick is action and then reaction. Because I was writing sentences like, his head flew back as the door opened, which is the opposite of, like, really the door opens and that makes your head fly back. So I was doing a lot of like mixing up my sentences and having my reactions come before my actions, which I think comes from like internal thought, that if you're used to doing a lot of internal thinking and things like that. So I'm like, you don't say he was surprised that the door opened. You say the door opened and then he was surprised. Those are really bad sentences, by the way. Don't actually say
but
that.
Hey, they're short.
They are short. They are short. So maybe they're great sentences. But it was just so eye-opening to me. Now, whenever I write an action scene, I sit and I read it, and each sentence, I just make sure that like the action happens first and then the reaction to the action that just happened. So that's my number 1 trick.
Excellent. I do love when advice is that simple, though, because it's so easy to remember and so easy to implement. So awesome.
And I have to say, I find that mistake in a lot of work, especially in critique groups and, on different groups I've worked with. But you also find it even with, like, when you're helping other authors, you do have that instinct of saying, oh, well, this happened. And then, but Esther made the comment that it's mostly when people are using a lot of internal thought and they're used to that. So clearly I just don't use internal thought. And that must be why action is, I'm not a thinker apparently, because it must make it easier for me.
Characters don't think either. They just barge right
do.
into the action.
Can you tell Sean's written with me recently?
Yes.
It's true. It is true. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. I hope that we would love to hear for writers. Let us know which do you like better and which do you hate more, if those are not too strong of words. between kissing scenes and action scenes. And for our readers, we would love to know which ones you like to read more. Would you rather read an action scene or would you rather read a kissing scene? So we want to hear
kissing action scene.
Ooh, okay. And Sarah gave you a third option, one that has both. So thanks
The one
again
that
for
none of us will ever write.
I don't know. I think we could pull it off, Sean.
Traci might.
I think we could do this. We can put our heads together. If one of you will think for me, I think it can work. So, all right. Well, thanks for joining us on Between the Lines. We hope to catch you next time.